The only sitting governor in the Democratic presidential primary arguing for a chief executive's resume in the White House. We sit down with presidential candidate and Montana Governor Steve Bullock on this edition of Iowa Press.
Funding for Iowa Press was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation, the Associated General Contractors of Iowa, the public's partner in building Iowa's highway, bridge, and municipal utility infrastructure.
I'm a dad.
I am a mom.
I'm a kid.
I'm a kid at heart. I'm a banker.
I'm an Iowa banker.
No matter who you are, there is an Iowa banker who is ready to help you get where you want to go. Iowa Bankers, allowing you to discover the genuine difference of Iowa banks.
For decades, Iowa Press has brought you politicians and newsmakers from across Iowa and beyond. Now celebrating more than 40 years of broadcast excellence on statewide Iowa Public Television. This is the Friday, September 13 edition of Iowa Press. Here is David Yepsen.
As 10 Democratic presidential candidates spent 3 hours on a debate stage in Houston, Texas this week, another candidate was here in Iowa holding events and meeting potential caucus goers. Montana Governor Steve Bullock jumped into the presidential race in May after his state's legislative session wrapped up. Governor Bullock joins us now here at the Iowa Press table. Governor, welcome.
Dave, it's great to be with all of you.
Good to have you. Joining us across the table are Aaron Murphy, Des Moines Bureau Chief for Lee Enterprises, and Radio Iowa News Director Kay Henderson.
Governor, you were not on the debate stage this week. You may not be on the debate stage next week. What is your path to victory if you're not on the debate stage?
Yeah, and Kay, I don't think that, at the end of the day, that this will be decided by those debates. I think it'll be actually decided by Iowans. In the early states, it's always been what takes a big field and narrows it down. Certainly frustrated, as Dave noted, I only got in May because my legislature was still meeting. I had a job to do. Had to get Medicaid expansion reauthorized for 100,000 folks. And I think the DNC meant well, but this rule of it becomes all about individual donors, I don't think it's probably the best way to run a campaign. But you look at every other year, I think it was 30-some days out from the Iowa caucuses, John Kerry was at 4 points. Al Sharpton was beating him. Once folks really start paying attention along the way, and I think that usually comes fairly late along the way, that's how we take a big field and make it much smaller.
You mentioned that you chose not to get into the race until after your legislative session. As admirable as that may be, you also understand the lay of the land and the way this works, and you saw candidates here in Iowa for months leading up to that. It's also a commitment to run for president. So how did you weigh that decision, knowing that was something that maybe you wanted to do and you were kind of putting yourself behind the pack, so to speak?
Yeah, and it was one where, look, Medicaid expansion in Montana covers 100,000 individuals. It's what helps keep our rural hospitals open. I got it passed through a legislature that was almost 2/3 Republican in 2015. We had to reauthorize it and it was going to be reauthorized by ballot initiative. Tobacco companies spent $26 million killing that ballot initiative reauthorization. So a month after that is when my legislature started. And look, I walk in, my legislature is more Republican than yours in Iowa. They had an excuse saying the voters had already spoken on this. So to get that done and any other number of things to do, I had to be there. If I had been spending my time in Iowa instead of Montana, there's 100,000 Montanans that wouldn't have health care. Now, on the one hand, choosing between getting 100,000 folks health care or chase 100,000 donors, easiest decision I'd ever make. But and the other, look, I would hope that doesn't disadvantage me when we're still, 140-some days away from any Iowan expressing their preference. Since then, I think the 16 weeks I've been in, this is my 11th or 12th trip out here to Iowa. I've really been talking to folks, and I think that Iowans take this really seriously, meaning that it's not an entitlement to be the first in the nation. It's actually a deep responsibility. And as a state that, we all leave come February too. And, you know, we spend a lot of time paying a lot of attention to Iowans. But then you also have to deal with, like, a third of your counties voted Obama, Trump. What happens at your state house here in Des Moines substantially impacts people in Iowa.
Are our campaigns too long? Is that the problem?
I think they are. I mean, I actually think, look, I don't even think you should be able to file. Think about, like, President Trump, essentially, right after taking the oath of office, reopened his campaign. Your U.S. senators, everybody makes it almost that you're campaigning full time for these jobs. And it might sell cable television ads. I don't think that's what most folks want. Because if you're out there across the state, people are just, they're tuning in now, if that.
Well, a little thing called the First Amendment. You can't stop people from campaigning, and the fact is that the process does favor the unemployed. Former governor.
Because I still have a job.
Yeah, so you still have a job.
Yeah, you could actually, and that's not stopping them from campaigning, but you could actually limit the amount of time where they can be raising money to campaign.
Okay.
Are you counting on a Biden implosion? You talked about, Kerry was at 4%. He didn't have to elbow 20 people out of the way to win. You would. Are you just hoping that the perceived frontrunner right now stumbles?
Well, I think every other time the perceived frontrunners haven't continued to be the frontrunners all throughout. So from that perspective, look, is the only governor in this race, is the only one that actually won in a Trump state, knowing we have to win back places we lost, is the only one that's actually gotten stuff done, not just talked about it as a governor, even with the Republican legislature. I think that I do add both a lot, and when you look at, be it a Vice President Biden or others, 30 years ago, I was all in with at the time, Senator Biden, when he was running until, kind of the wheels fell off. And I think folks are probably they want to look forward, not be looking backwards.
Governor, let's go to your key issue that you talk about in this campaign, and that is your ability to attract rural voters. Democrats have to do better at attracting rural voters because of the rural skew in the Electoral College. How do you do that?
Well, I think, first of all, you show up, right? So, like, as simple as that might sound, yeah. So I was the only Democrat in the country to get reelected in a state that Trump won. He took Montana by 20. I won by 4. 25 to 30% of my voters voted for Donald Trump. And showing up and listening is something that we as Democrats aren't always as good at doing in rural areas as well as urban areas. We got to recognize about 2/3 of the counties in this country lost businesses over the last decade, and folks saying, look, I shouldn't have to leave, right, my church or synagogue or my school just to make a decent living. So recognizing that the challenges in rural areas are going to be different at times than the challenges in urban areas, but the values are the values are the same. And as someone that actually represents rural areas and have been able to connect in those, somebody in a rural community wants to be able to stay in that community. Well, you're not going to stay in that community if your hospital closes down, and 20% of rural hospitals are at risk of closure. Somebody in a rural community wants to be able to have a decent job and connectivity to the internet. Well, it's going to be that much more difficult if we don't actually focus on those areas. So I think that what I bring is, look, the path to victory, it doesn't just go through our coasts and our urban areas. If we can't win places back, like in rural Iowa, or Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, to your point, this is about math.
What do you tell rural candidates in a state like Iowa? What's the secret sauce? I mean, here in this state, there's a battle for the control of the Iowa House of Representatives. What are you telling Iowa Democrats about what they have to do to win? Show up. Okay, I get that.
Yeah, there are a couple different things, one of which, who we have, I think, at the top of the ticket impacts this all the way down. So if we have somebody as our nominee that feels, or that rural America feels disconnected to, or that they're not talking about the issues and the challenges of the here and now, it makes it that much harder for that Iowa legislator or legislative candidate. But urban or rural, it's more than just showing up. Like, I begin in Montana with a base assumption that the values most people hold are the same, even if their political ideologies are different, right? Everybody wants a safe community, decent job, roof over their head, clean air, clean water, good public schools, the belief you can do better for that next generation than yourself. So making the case to that and saying you can do that and you can stay in these rural areas. And you'll wake up each day as a legislative candidate, just like I've woken up every day as governor, saying there's something bigger than just the partisan squabbles. It's actually improving people's lives. And I think that you can do that here.
So let's talk about that. How do you do that, especially looking at the rural economy? And you mentioned that a little bit earlier. So what are the solutions to help people in those areas, help people have good jobs so where they can stay in those areas, avoid population decline? You mentioned broadband, internet. A lot of candidates talk about that. What else is part of that solution?
And that's only a really small piece of it. And we actually put out at the stevebullock.com sort of what I think is a pretty comprehensive rural plan, but it's also attainable, and we even put in each section how we would actually address it to get it there. Certainly here in Iowa, in Montana, agriculture is significant. What this administration has done with sort of the trade wars and thinking that you're going to open up and you're going to change China's practices just by the blunt instrument of tariffs has not been helpful at all. You have multi-generation folks or folks wanting to go back to the farm. Yet a young farmer, it's that much harder given both the capital outlays and the land outlays. So we proposed some loan programs along the way that are already existing that you could augment. The idea that if you lose a rural hospital, that town's gone. And I think you've got dang near 70 rural hospitals sort of teetering on the edge here in Iowa. That's 20% of them all across the country. So investing and making sure that your reimbursement rates, in addition to a decent Medicaid expansion program, matters. I've also said, because you have all these great programs, many of them great in the federal government, you know, it's not just all in U.S. Department of Agriculture, it's not just in Commerce, it's not just in Health and Human Services. I want to have an Office of Rural Affairs actually that goes all the way up to the top and coordinates all these efforts in a systematic way to address the challenges.
There's often a different attitude toward guns in rural America than there is in urban America. Do you support what many of the candidates on the debate stage this past week said? Do you support a ban on assault-style weapons?
I do actually support no longer selling them, so stopping selling them.
Would you go as far as buying them back, mandatory turn-in programs?
No, I wouldn't.
What sort of additional measures would you support?
Yeah, and I think, look, I'm a gun owner, like 40% of households in this country. Like, I own firearms, and I'm a hunter. I think if we could ever look at this as a public health issue, not as a political issue, the answers are actually a lot easier. The vast majority of even gun owners think universal background checks make sense. That's how they've gotten their firearms, as long as we have the instant check system as it should be. You look at it, safe storage laws, which we need to do. Red flag laws, being able to remove a gun where an individual has manifested, some either problems or challenges. Like even Indiana passed that. That's not a real liberal area of the country or of our nation as well. And then, as you note, that, and I've said even Dick's and Walmart are no longer selling assault weapons. They're not used for hunting. They're not used for self-defense. There's no reason we should continue selling them as well. But when I was growing up, I think the challenge that we face in this is, when I was growing up, the NRA was a gun safety, a hunting, and a shooting organization. Now it's nothing more than a political reason. I'll give you 30 million reasons why we're not making any progress. It's $30 million that the NRA spent on Donald Trump's election. Think about it, right after Parkland. Go ahead.
You're going to be able to sell this program to voters in Montana and rural Iowa?
Oh, I think when you look at, when you look at the fact that overwhelmingly gun owners think universal background checks should be in place, that the answer is yes. And I think gun owners need to call on Congress to actually take some actions along the way. Because it's even, look at, a fourth of the times I've been asked to lower the flags as president or as governor has been for mass shootings. Folks are tired of the thought that we can't take any actions on this.
There's a real rural-urban split on this gun issue. How does an American president bridge the gap between rural Americans, for whom gun ownership is a part of their culture, their heritage, and also a matter of self-protection in rural areas, with people in urban areas in Chicago where gun violence is just routine? I mean, the evening news, how many people got? How do you bridge that gap as a leader?
I think you do it, and it's a part of my culture and heritage too, gun ownership. I think you do it by saying this isn't a political issue, this is a public health issue. I mean, the vast majority of gun owners say universal background checks, as I noted, as an example. The problem is that NRA has now used it just as a political issue to try to scare everybody into thinking that somebody's going to take away everyone's guns. And that's not the case. We need to take some common sense steps. And I think we're finally getting to that point where we can have a meaningful discussion about steps that we can take to actually keep our kids and our community safer.
So speaking of money in elections, one of the topics that you talk a lot about on the campaign trail is dark money and campaign finance reform. How do you achieve something meaningful on that front? And Dave noted early on about the First Amendment when it comes to maybe reining in the campaign season. Kind of the same issue here. How do you achieve meaningful campaign finance reform without running afoul of the First Amendment and freedom of speech when it comes to that?
Yeah, and let's not kid ourselves. Like, we used to be able to regulate outside spending, dark money spending, until this case called Citizens United. And the only thing that changed, the First Amendment didn't change, the composition of the court changed on a 5-4 decision. And I've had the opportunity to, because I was Attorney General for a governor, work with your good AG Tom Miller, who's endorsed me in this race along the way. I mean, what we've been able to do in Montana is, one, I passed a law that said, I don't care what sort of group you call yourself, 90 days out from an election, you have to disclose every dollar you're spending in our elections. So doing that made it so the dark money spending, so that's undisclosed money, which was about 2% of all outside spending for Citizens United, now is over half in these midterms. That dried up the dark money in our elections. As president, and I'm the only state that did this executive order, again, recognizing the First Amendment, I've said to anybody that wants to bid on major state contracts, I can't tell you that you can't spend or contribute in our elections, but if you're going to, you just have to disclose all that money that you're spending or contributing. Think about if the federal government did that, because contracts with almost every company in this country. At least we'll add the sunshine and transparency, which is what Citizens United decision, as wrongful and horrible as that was, it was still premised on voters would know who's trying to buy their elections. By adding that sunshine and transparency, and I think it'll change corporate behavior.
Okay. We have a number of issues to get through. You're an attorney. Do you think that there should be term limits for members of the Supreme Court and courts of appeals at the federal level?
I don't.
Why not?
Because I think that we've seen time and time again, it's sort of the wisdom of a judge, the more time that he or she is on the bench, it actually accumulates and changes. And I've argued in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, I'd love to think it's non-political. What Mitch McConnell did at the end of Obama's term demonstrated it's otherwise. So I am open to expanding the court from 9 to 11. I know that our courts are substantially overburdened. I think that we should add judges both at the circuit court and the district level, but I don't think term limits is how we actually get there to get a more enlightened judiciary.
Your party is having a robust discussion about health care. What would be your cure or reform in that regard?
I think we have to make sure everybody has accessible and affordable health care. I think we can get there with a public option, the ability to buy in. It is outrageous that Costco can negotiate prescription drug prices, but the federal government can't. That goes back to money in politics. I think you could end surprise medical billing and out-of-network charges. So what I would do is actually build on the advances we've made with the Affordable Care Act, not rip it away and start all over, because you got about 165 million people that have employer-sponsored health insurance. I don't think the answer is to take that away from everyone.
Another issue we hear a lot about from Democratic voters is climate change and climate policy. What in your plan would stand out? What would you tell voters that's something you've proposed that helps you stand out from the field in that arena?
Well, I think a number of areas. look, and going back to money in politics, the Republican Party is the only major political party in the world that no longer acknowledges that climate change is real. And that used to not be the case. I mean, the first George Bush actually said we should lead from the White House on this. I think we have to take immediate and durable action. I mean, you see this impact in Iowa. In the West, our fire seasons are about 80 days longer than they were 3 decades ago. Science says we have to be carbon neutral by 2050. I think we could do it 2040 or even earlier as an entire world. Step one, certainly rejoin Paris. Step two, it was so great to see that even the auto industry didn't want to roll back these fuel efficiency standards. I direct that all federal lands are net zero emissions by 2030. And I think we need to make federal investments to move this along. There's a few things Democrats aren't always talking about. You know, it's hard to care about the end of the earth if all you're thinking about, can I make it to the end of the month? Meaning that we have to make this a climate opportunity, not just the crisis that it is, and say we can create good jobs, not leave communities behind as we do it. And I think we also got to recognize, right, that as Republicans aren't even acknowledging they want to take any steps, we can't wait another 30 or 40 years. So some of those things, and I've doubled my wind, quadrupled renewable, or quadrupled solar in Montana. We've been able to do it by saying, here are opportunities both for economic development and to preserve our planet.
What's your view on pipelines? They're harvesting oil up in your region. There was a big kerfuffle in Iowa among some Democrats about extending the Dakota Access Pipeline through Iowa. Is that a good idea?
I don't know about the Dakota Access through Iowa. I mean, I'd be the only one in this field that the Keystone would actually run through the state. And I've also dealt with twice in Montana pipeline breaches in the Yellowstone River. And that's the longest free-flowing river in the country. So I was pretty vocal with the Trump administration that I think you have to do a number of different things, one of which give the assurances that you wouldn't have breaches in a pipeline, so the safety and security part of it. There should be adequate consultation with our tribal nations, which there hasn't been. And as we're approving these, we have to look at the overall effect on climate, and that's what a court has even said.
Governor, way too many questions.
Yeah,
not
a lot
enough
of
time. Immigration.
Yes.
What do we do?
What do we do? We recognize right now the biggest problem with our overall immigration system is Donald Trump. He's using it to rip families apart and rip this country apart. We need comprehensive immigration reform. We need to take care of our dreamers. We need to actually find a path to citizenship for those without documentation. And we need border security. But we have a bureaucratic system with about 450 judges and 950,000 cases. We've taken away money from the Northern Triangle countries. What we need to do is get rid of this president and get back to some sanity in our overall immigration policy.
Aaron?
Social Security, what needs to be done there to make that program solvent for the long term?
Well, it's a commitment that we make from the first paycheck that, as we're taking money out of ours, and it also shows how we actually treat all of those around us. So I think that at the end of the day, to make sure that it's funded, you got to lift the cap on the higher end, and you can also then
raise or eliminate altogether.
What's that? Raise.
Yep.
Raise. And then you can get to a sustainability of funding, and you could actually, at the lower end, increase the benefit.
How do you keep China from stealing intellectual property? Do you have to reopen something akin to the Trans-Pacific Partnership?
Yeah, first you don't do it on the backs of farmers and ranchers, and that's exactly what Trump has done. He said we have to address IP, but he's done it with this blunt instrument of tariffs. I think that you can use some of the quote-unquote, albeit they're slow, the WTO and other of sort of our international institutions. And I think that you make it pretty clear that you can't be investing in the Huawei's and the other companies that are stealing, at the end of the day, our property. But we can't do this alone. I mean, Trump has made America first into America alone. We're not the only country dealing with IP theft, although he wants to make it so we're just a sole actor. That's not the way you lead in this world.
Governor, we've got a minute left. I want to ask about student debt. what do we do in the country about all the students that carrying, and former students carrying incredible amounts of debt?
Yeah, and it is, look, I had to pay off $175,000 in real terms, today's terms, of student debt along the way. So I think you could do a number of things to make it more affordable. You could actually cap the student loan interest rates. You could increase Pell eligibility. You could crack down on the fly-by-nights, you know, the for-profits that are really taking a lot of money out of this. I'm not one that says that we should pay off all $1.6 trillion of student debt. You know, we're not even talking about the fact that 68% of the people in this country don't even have a 2-year degree. And what are we doing for them along the way? So I think that we can actually make the debt load more bearable without saying we're going to eliminate it for everyone.
We're going to go in just a second. Are you worried about your party moving too far to the left to win a general election as a result of this primary?
Well, I'm concerned that a lot of the stuff that our party is at times talking about doesn't connect with the farmer in Rippey, Iowa, or someone in Ottumwa. And we can't become the party that's disconnected from people's daily lives. We can't become a party that just represents coasts and urban areas. I think I'm a person that can make those connections all the way. And as a governor who's had to balance a budget, actually get things done, bring a little bit more of a pragmatic yet progressive, actually getting progress done perspective.
Governor, I'm out of time.
Thank you very much for having me.
For being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll be back next week with another edition of Iowa Press at our regular times, 7:30 Friday night and noon on Sunday. For all of us here at Iowa Public Television, I'm David Yepsen, and thanks for joining us today.
Funding for Iowa Press was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation, the Associated General Contractors of Iowa, the public's partner in building Iowa's highway, bridge, and municipal utility infrastructure.
I'm a dad.
I am a mom.
I'm a kid.
I'm a kid at heart. I'm a banker.
I'm an Iowa banker.
No matter who you are, there is an Iowa banker who is ready to help you get where you want to go. Iowa Bankers, allowing you to discover the genuine difference of Iowa banks.